balancing of management and leadership. The culture part that we're focusing on today is primarily on the leadership dimension. But that target slide that Don showed also talked about processes and talked about how all of that gets integrated together. But the key thing that I would really want to underline and what Don has done is when you look at a lot of the research, and I've been in this field since the early 80s when we first started working with Tom Peters around all that excellence stuff back in the early 80s, and people went off for a weekend and got excellenced and then came back and said, okay, now we got that under our belt, let's move ahead. And then TQM, Total Quality Management, came along. People get sheep dipped in a bunch of TQM kind of principles and hire someone to come in, well, these days it's Six Sigma and Lean, hire somebody to come in and make us a Six Sigma company, make us a Lean company, or whether it's teams, or whatever the flavor of the month or the day is, or process re-engineering. Over the years, there have been all kinds of programs, many of them very, very powerful tools, but as you probably know, the failure rate, which has been studied quite extensively, runs from 50 to 70% failure rate with those tools and approaches. So that's the glass half empty. If you look at the glass half full, the success rate runs around 30 to 50%. Well, what makes the huge difference here? Well, in our own experience and the research that I've continued to study on it, primarily what makes the difference is the senior leadership team and how the team uses these tools and integrates them into the way they manage the business. And that's part of what you've been given a bit of a snapshot of in Don's presentation. So the way we've tended to frame that, and let me go and get the right slide, there we go. And way back when we first began a retreat and began to do some planning with Don and his team at the early stages, as he mentioned with Metro, we started to look at this notion of how do we move along this continuum? How do we move beyond this passionate lip service stage? Because lots of managers will get pretty passionate about values and customers and all of the sorts of things that Don has talked about. And so we'll get to maybe that stage. And the degree of change, the further along the continuum we go, the more change there will be. But part of the problem here is here's where many managers will stand up in front of a room full of their staff and say, you need to be a more customer-focused company. You need to work more like a team. You need to, and what's wrong with this picture? It's all about me figuring out how to change you. It's all, and we get hired to do this quite a lot. We'll come in and fix or change or reshape our company and reshape our culture. And it kind of reminds me of the old adage from my days when our kids were younger. They're now all adults. And you see your kids doing something and you think, where'd you learn that? And if you're really honest and you look in the mirror and think, well, I think I recognize some of that behavior. There's an old saying that says children act like their parents despite all attempts to teach them good manners. You see some of that behavior and think, I think I recognize some of that behavior. It clearly comes from your mother. Because it's so difficult, I find, for executives and managers to really face the fact that how they're leading the organization and their behavior and the kind of examples that they clearly set is what makes the major difference. And so there's a real clear line here between good intentions, and this is where I would say the 50 to 70% failure rates, this is where a lot of the executives and management teams are. And so good intentions tend to go down this way, true follow-through, and really talking about, so what does that look like in behavior? What does that mean for how we lead and manage the organization? And that's a big part of, hopefully, what you've got a bit of a sense of from Don's presentation. Well, what I'll do is I'll give you a bit of a sense of the framework that we use to guide a lot of these efforts. We first used it back in with SCM. Go back and build this. And we used it in a different way with a greenfield operation, because obviously there's two different kinds of situations. In the case of SCM, it was an existing organization with an existing set of values, and how do we revitalize that and bring those back alive? And some of the work we did in Germany as well with SCM was a similar kind of thing. How do you revitalize that and in some cases, turn around some of that behavior. And then in the case of a greenfield or a startup situation, as Don has explained, you can bake that in right from the very beginning. So the key thing, as Don has emphasized now a couple times, is vision, values, and purpose. And this is a tricky one, because over the years, we've certainly seen, when I go back to the 80s and the time that the Search of Excellence and all that came out, this was brand new for many people. And most organizations hadn't done much of this. Today, you go into most organizations and say, have you got a set of core values? Yep. Have you got a vision? Yep. Have you got a mission statement? Yep. Check all that stuff off. But what's the snicker factor in the organization? How alive are they? How meaningful are they? For me, one of the key tests is if you can go into an organization and ask anybody at random, what are your values? And if they can recite the values like that without referring to a piece of paper, you know that they're boiled down to a few, not 9. They're down to 3 or 4. And they're alive in some way. Obviously, if you go into Metro, they're all over the place. So you would sure hope that anybody would be able to very quickly say, yeah, these are our core values. So having real life is what's key. And the vision part is not a statement that sounds like it was crafted by a committee of lawyers, but is a real picture of the future, a real shared sense, a shared image of what's the kind of organization we're trying to build here. What are we trying to be? And that, if you come back to the management leadership equation that I talked about, that's the leadership, the emotional intelligence part, where you connect. And that's one thing that I think Don and some of the senior team are very good at doing, is finding ways to make those connections and to build that vision. So that's the beginning point. And then there's a series of strategic, we use the term strategic imperatives, you could call them key initiatives, projects, there's different terms you could use. But we always suggest no more than 5, usually more like 3 or 4 key focal points, areas that you're going to really zero in on. And in your case, it was looking at the whole hiring and development of your culture was one of them. And another one might be building our processes and process improvement, KPIs. So depending on if it's a startup, there may even be something around policies and HR and all that sort of thing. In other cases, it may be revitalizing work that's going on or bringing in a training program. There's a whole series of things. So that then moves into setting up what are the goals and measures that go with each one of those. So what are we trying to achieve with each of those initiatives? And then this starts to become part of the key element. And both at SCM, at Metro, and with a number of our other clients, we've worked fairly hard to really build an experience. It's usually a day, sometimes it's 2 days for the management group. We really have everybody go through and experience what we mean by the culture, what we mean by those values, bringing them alive. The one I remember from SCM was following a case of paper towels through the distribution center, because most people have no idea how the whole thing really worked. And so you had a kind of almost like a game or experience where everyone had to figure out, well, what are the steps of the process. So just help them really tune into, or the magic carpet from Walmart, is that what we call it? Yeah, which is an exercise that helps really build some of the concepts of values and team and so on. So typically that kind of experience comes into play. And then there may be a number of different things. Training, KPIs that link back up to imperatives here, specific projects or initiatives that link back up in here, and ultimately then are reported and followed through. And that really is what brings us back to the last piece that I'll add, and I'll turn it back over to you, Dawn, is integration then is where it's how you manage the business. The way, it just becomes part of the way we do things around here. I remember years ago I was facilitating a session for Toyota in Cambridge at their plant just before they took on the new Lexus line there, and we're doing some strategic planning. They're an impressive organization. I was there as a facilitator for their process, which is quite a rigorous process. And at break time, one of the participants was chatting with one of the other executives and said, I'm going to go down tomorrow to speak at a conference on Six Sigma. The other executive, Six Sigma, what the heck is Six Sigma? So he was trying to explain Lean and Six Sigma and getting into it. He says, oh, that's TPS. Yeah, right, well, TPS, the Toyota Production System, been around since the 50s when Deming first went over there and taught them how to use those kinds of approaches. And it's just so integrated as the way they manage the organization that there's no special program to it. There's no special, it's just how we do things around here. it is our culture, it is our organization.